There comes a moment in prayer when human language fails, when your vocabulary cannot carry the weight of your spirit's cry. It's in that sacred moment that the Spirit Himself begins to pray through you. You see, true prayer is not about saying more words. It's about surrendering deeper. It's about stepping beyond the limits of your understanding and allowing heaven to intercede through you. When you pray in the Spirit, you don't just speak to God, you speak with God. And when that happens, breakthrough is no longer a possibility. It becomes a divine certainty. The hidden language of power, praying in the Spirit until heaven responds. You see, there is a kind of prayer that moves beyond human limitation, beyond the noise of earthly language, beyond the rehearsed phrases that impress people but fail to move heaven. It is the kind of prayer that comes from deep within your spirit, not from your mind, not from your emotions, but from the core of your being. When you step into that realm, you are no longer just speaking to God, you are communing with Him. Prayer was never meant to be a performance. It was designed to be a partnership, a divine transaction between the visible and the invisible, the human and the holy. When you pray in the Spirit, you are entering into heaven's frequency. You are tuning your heart to the language of the kingdom, and suddenly your words begin to carry weight. They begin to carry authority, because it's no longer you praying, it's the Spirit praying through you. Have you ever noticed that sometimes your words run out, but your burden doesn't? You know what to say, but it's not enough. You've prayed all the prayers, and still there's something inside you crying for more. That's the moment the Spirit takes over. He begins to articulate what your mind cannot express, and your tongue becomes an instrument of divine utterance. Heaven begins to record those groans, those sighs, those unspoken petitions, because they come from a place deeper than reason. They come from revelation. When you pray in the Spirit, you bypass confusion. You bypass fear. You bypass the limitations of your own understanding. The Spirit knows what God has prepared for you, even when you don't. He intercedes with precision. He aligns your heart with heaven's blueprint. He begins to pray through you for things you don't even know you need yet. That's why breakthrough happens, not because you shouted louder, but because your spirit finally spoke heaven's language. And when heaven hears its own language, it responds. The doors begin to open. The chains begin to fall. Enemies that were hidden begin to flee. Because spiritual language activates spiritual law. It sets things in motion that your natural mind cannot comprehend. It summons angels. It confuses darkness. It calls down light. And suddenly, what seemed delayed becomes accelerated. What seemed lost becomes restored. This is why the enemy fears a praying believer who prays in the Spirit. He can interrupt your words, but he cannot decode your spirit. He can attack your emotions, but he cannot touch your divine communication. Because when you open your mouth under the influence of the Spirit, you become a vessel of divine power, a carrier of heaven's decree. So don't just pray until you're tired. Pray until your spirit catches fire. Pray until your words disappear and the Spirit takes command. Pray until heaven recognizes your voice and responds. Because the moment heaven responds, everything changes. And what comes next will take you even deeper. When words end and the Spirit takes over, that's when true prayer begins. You see, there's a level of prayer that goes beyond human speech, beyond what your mind can structure or your emotions can express. It's the moment when you run out of words, but not out of desire. When your lips fall silent, yet your heart is still speaking. That's when heaven leans in closer, because you've crossed from the natural into the supernatural. So many people stop praying when words run dry. They think silence means weakness. But in the Spirit, silence is power. It's in that still moment, when your vocabulary is exhausted, that the Spirit begins to articulate mysteries. He begins to speak through groanings, through sounds, through unutterable expressions that bypass language and strike directly into the throne of God. That's not weakness. My friend, that's divine takeover. The Spirit does not need your grammar. He needs your surrender. When you yield to Him, He begins to use your voice as His instrument. You may not even understand what you're saying, but heaven does. Angels understand. Darkness trembles, because your spirit is now communicating in the language of eternity. And in that moment, you are no longer praying for victory, you are praying from victory. Have you ever wondered why certain prayers break barriers instantly, while others seem to hit a ceiling? It's not the volume of your voice. It's not the length of your sentences. It's the source of your prayer. When you pray from your flesh, you reach the earth. But when you pray from your spirit, you reach heaven. And when heaven is reached, heaven responds. There is a point in prayer when your words can no longer carry your pain, your faith, your passion. And that's when the Spirit steps in. He takes your weakness and turns it into strength. He takes your confusion and translates it into clarity. He takes your longing and transforms it into divine alignment. You may not know what to say, but the Spirit always knows what must be said. He prays according to the perfect will of God, not your emotions, not your fear, not your limited view, but heaven's exact purpose for your life. And when the Spirit prays through you, everything around you begins to shift. What was locked begins to open. What was hidden begins to unfold. You begin to sense divine order, divine timing, divine momentum. You begin to walk not by sight, but by revelation. Because when the Spirit prays, He doesn't just speak to God. He speaks as God within you. So the next time you find yourself without words, don't stop praying. That's not the end. That's the beginning of Spirit-led communication. It's in that moment that you are the closest to heaven. It's in that silence that the loudest miracles are born. Because when the Spirit takes over your prayer, the impossible no longer stands a chance. And what happens next will awaken a new level of power within you. Unlocking breakthrough dimensions through spiritual intercession, this is where ordinary prayer becomes extraordinary power. You see, intercession is not just praying for someone. It is standing between heaven and earth, becoming the bridge that connects God's will to human reality. It is where your spirit becomes a channel for divine intervention. And when you step into that realm, you no longer pray small prayers. You start moving heaven's agenda. There are levels of prayer that deal with your needs, but intercession moves beyond that. It's not about asking, it's about partnering. It's about being trusted by God with His own burdens. When you begin to intercede in the Spirit, you touch dimensions that are not accessible through ordinary words. You begin to sense things before they happen. You feel divine urgency. You start to pray not for comfort, but for kingdom. Have you ever felt a sudden heaviness in your heart? A deep stirring that you couldn't explain? That's not emotion, that's invitation. The Spirit is calling you to intercede, to unlock a breakthrough that someone, somewhere, is desperate for. He places His burden in your spirit so that heaven can find legal access through your voice. Because in the earth, God moves through intercessors. When you open your mouth in the Spirit, you give God permission to invade situations, to shift atmospheres, to rewrite destinies. In that moment, your prayer becomes warfare. You may not see it, but your spirit begins to battle on divine frequencies. Angels are dispatched. Demonic plans are interrupted. Chains are broken. Doors are unlocked. Because intercession is not passive. It's power in motion. It's the sound of heaven invading earth through human surrender. When you pray in the Spirit as an intercessor, you are no longer guessing what to say. The Spirit prays through you with accuracy. He targets the root, not the surface. He speaks into the unseen, not the obvious. And that's why breakthrough happens, because heaven's will is being declared on earth through your mouth. That's why the scripture says, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And listen carefully. Breakthrough is not always about receiving something new. Sometimes it's about releasing what's been trapped. There are blessings that have been delayed, opportunities that have been held back, miracles that have been waiting for your intercession. The Spirit knows where they are. He knows what to unlock. And when you yield, when you pray in alignment, He releases them into motion. That's why the most powerful people in the kingdom are not always the ones seen on platforms. They are the ones found on their knees. Hidden warriors, silent intercessors who shift nations in prayer rooms and change futures through groanings that only heaven can interpret. So when you pray in the Spirit, don't just ask for a breakthrough. Become the breakthrough. Pray until the atmosphere changes, until the chains fall, until heaven responds. Because when intercession reaches its peak, something greater is about to be revealed. The secret chamber, that sacred place where the Spirit prays what you cannot express. You see, prayer was never meant to be a public performance. It was designed to be a private encounter. The real power of prayer is not in how loud you sound, but in how deeply you connect. It is in that quiet, hidden space, away from the noise and distractions, where heaven begins to whisper secrets. When you enter that chamber, that place of solitude, surrender, and spiritual stillness, something divine happens. The clutter of your mind begins to fade, and the voice of God begins to rise. You stop talking to God, and you start hearing from Him. Because in the secret place, prayer stops being a monologue and becomes a dialogue. It becomes communion. So many people pray publicly, but are empty privately. They know how to impress men, but not how to touch God. Yet, every great move of heaven begins in hidden places. Every breakthrough, every revelation, every miracle starts in the secret chamber, because that's where the Spirit interprets the language of your soul. That's where He begins to pray through you in alignment with heaven's plan. Have you ever gone before God and found no words, no energy, no structure to your prayer? That's not failure. That's invitation. That's the Spirit drawing you deeper. He waits until your flesh grows silent, so your spirit can begin to speak. It is in that silence that the Spirit searches your heart and begins to communicate directly with the Father. He takes your tears, your sighs, your wordless desires, and translates them into divine expression. Heaven understands every tear, every pause, every groan. In the secret chamber, God doesn't just hear your words, He hears your truth. You can't fake sincerity in His presence. You can't pretend faith when your heart is weary. But when you come as you are, when you open your spirit without pretense, the Spirit meets you there. He becomes your strength in weakness. He becomes your voice when you can't speak. He becomes your intercessor when you have no direction. And it's in that sacred moment, when you surrender control, that transformation begins. The secret chamber is not where you escape life. It's where you are equipped to face it. It's where clarity is born, peace is restored, and power is renewed. You walk in heavy, but you come out carrying divine authority. You kneel in weakness, but you rise in wisdom. Because when the Spirit prays for you, He prays according to the perfect will of God. And that's why breakthroughs birthed in secret can never be broken in public. What God establishes in private, no force in hell can destroy. So don't rush out of that place too quickly. Stay until your heart settles. Wait until your spirit catches fire. Because what happens in that chamber will soon manifest in the open. And when it does, the world will know you've been with God. From groaning to glory, that's the journey of Spirit-filled prayer. You see, There are sounds that come from your spirit that words cannot form. Groanings that rise out of pain, out of passion, out of holy desperation. Those sounds may seem strange to the human ear, but to heaven, they are the language of transformation. They are the echoes of your spirit, pushing through resistance, breaking through barriers, birthing divine outcomes. When you pray in the Spirit, sometimes it's not beautiful, it's not eloquent, it's raw, it's deep, it's real. You may not understand it, but something inside you does. That groaning is not weakness, it's creation in motion. Because just as a mother groans before a child is born, your spirit groans before a miracle manifests. Every groan carries the sound of expectation, the vibration of something new being released from the unseen into the seen. You see, groaning is not just about pain, it's about purpose. It's your spirit aligning with the will of God, crying out for what heaven has already finished, but earth has not yet revealed. That's why the scripture says, the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings too deep for words. Those groanings are not ordinary, they are prophetic. They declare what your mind cannot see. They release what your strength cannot accomplish. Have you ever prayed until you had no more strength left? Until all you could do was weep, sigh, or whisper his name? That's when the Spirit is taking over. That's when he turns your pain into power, your tears into testimony. Every sigh becomes a seed. Every tear becomes an altar. Heaven collects them, translates them, and responds. Because those groanings carry weight, not emotional weight, but spiritual authority. In those moments, don't rush to find the right words. Don't try to make your prayer sound impressive. Just yield. Let the Spirit take your broken sounds and transform them into heavenly decrees. He knows how to turn your groans into glory, your confusion into clarity, your silence into strength. For every deep cry that leaves your spirit, there is a divine answer waiting to meet it. And when glory comes, it doesn't just change your situation, it changes you. You rise from that place of prayer with a new perspective, a new confidence, a new power, because the glory of God does not visit without leaving evidence. It heals what was hurting, restores what was missing, and empowers what was weak. You may have gone into prayer groaning, but you come out glowing, filled, renewed, radiant with his presence. So don't despise the groaning season. Don't run from the deep places of prayer. For in those hidden, wordless moments, the Spirit is shaping your destiny. He's preparing your spirit to carry something greater. And when the glory finally breaks forth, it will reveal the reason for every groan that came before it. When you pray beyond the flesh, heaven begins to move. Because flesh prays from fear, but the Spirit prays from faith. Flesh focuses on the problem, but the Spirit focuses on the promise. When you rise above your emotions, your reasoning, your doubts, and your distractions, you step into a realm where prayer becomes power, not just sound. You begin to command what heaven has already declared. The greatest hindrance to prayer has never been the devil. It has always been the flesh. The enemy doesn't need to stop your prayer life. He just needs to keep you in the realm of feelings. Because as long as you pray from your flesh, you are bound by sight. You are limited by what you see, what you feel, and what you think. But the moment your spirit takes the lead, everything changes. You begin to pray with authority. You begin to pray from revelation, not frustration. You begin to decree, not beg. Have you ever noticed that when you truly enter the Spirit, time disappears? You lose track of minutes, of words, of surroundings. Because at that moment, you've stepped out of the natural and into eternity. You've entered a dimension where your words are no longer yours. They are heaven's. The Spirit begins to guide your speech, align your thoughts, and synchronize your heart with God's heartbeat. That's when prayer becomes prophetic. That's when the impossible starts shifting in your favor. The flesh is loud, but the Spirit is accurate. The flesh reacts, but the Spirit creates. That's why you can't depend on how you feel to determine how you pray. Feelings change, truth doesn't. Flesh says, I can't. Spirit says, it is done. Flesh says, it's too late. Spirit says, God is never late. When you pray in the Spirit, you silence the voice of limitation and activate the power of divine certainty. You stop repeating your problems and you start declaring solutions. When heaven begins to move, you'll notice it doesn't always move how you expect. It moves in alignment with what was spoken in the Spirit. That's why some breakthroughs take shape quietly, behind the scenes, long before they appear in the natural. Because when your spirit prays, it sets invisible forces into motion. Angels respond, circumstances rearrange, mountains shift. It may take time for your eyes to see it, but heaven is already working it out. So keep praying beyond your flesh. Keep pressing beyond fatigue, beyond fear, beyond logic. Don't stop when it feels empty. That's when the Spirit fills you. Don't quit when you don't see results. That's when heaven is closest. For the prayers that move mountains are the ones birthed in the Spirit, not in emotion. And when you pray beyond your flesh, when your spirit takes charge, when heaven begins to respond, you become unstoppable. You become unshakable. You become the living evidence that prayer still changes everything. So pray until the natural submits to the supernatural. Pray until weakness becomes strength. Pray until fear bows to faith. Pray until every door opens. Pray until heaven moves, because when the Spirit prays through you, nothing on earth can stand against you.